Well, good morning, everyone. It's fantastic to see everyone here today, and thank you so much for inviting me along to this really important event as we kick off 2025 together. Deputy Premier, it's great to see you here. DG, FS. I was talking to our Honourable Premier last night about this event. She had to go back to the BRAC yesterday, but I know that she sends her very, very good wishes and acknowledges just how important it is to be bringing us all together today. It's great to see Marla here as well, and thank you very much to everyone from the Chamber, Joe, Will, Amari, the whole board, and all of you. In fact, the first thing I really wanted to say was a massive thank you to everyone for all of the tremendous work that you do to put us in the position we are today, which I think is to stand here in Cayman and to really feel that despite all of the global uncertainty out there, despite all of the things that are going on, we remain in a relatively very strong position, I think, to tackle the future. And that is in so many ways down to our businesses, our financial sector, everybody out there, everybody in this room that is contributing to this economic strength of the islands. So the first thing to say was just thank you all very, very much for everything that you are doing to put us in this position. It does still feel like the new year, doesn't it? I think we're still, only halfway through January, really. So I think I can still say Happy New Year to everybody. And I was wondering about New Year resolutions. Have you all made New Year resolutions for 2025? I've made a few. I'm never very good at keeping them. But a couple of mine were to improve my performance at pickleball, which remains really terrible. So if any of you have got hints on that, that would be very good. Another of my resolutions is really not to look at the phone if I wake up in the middle of the night. I'm told constantly that that is very bad for your health, so I need to get better at that. And the other thing I've been doing in the government admin building is being determined not to use the lift when I go up to the 5th floor, which is all very well, but it does mean that any of you who've had a meeting with me at kind of 8:30 in the morning will find that I'm kind of puffing like an old dragon because I've probably just walked up all of those stairs. So those are my resolutions, and I was kind of thinking today, if I wanted to talk to you about 2 or 3 of my resolutions for Cayman for 2025, what would they be? Well, I think the first resolution would have to be security. So that probably doesn't surprise you because it's part of my direct responsibilities. And it's probably not a thing that you necessarily think about as your top priority every day as businesses. But I'm just so aware that security of our islands, which then bolsters the kind of confidence that we need for the economy, is so very, very important. And when you look around the world and the sort of threats there are to securities, whether we're looking at the wildfires in Los Angeles or even the riots we've had in the UK, or the kind of more close to home law enforcement threats that are out there in our Caribbean region, in Turks and Caicos, Anguilla, Jamaica. You don't have to look very far to see that, do you? I think it just brings home how fortunate we are and how very, very important it is for us to manage these risks. So one thing about security is obviously crisis, natural events, man-made events. I don't know if any of you have seen some very large ships in the harbour this week, some unknown planes flying overhead. We're not being invaded, but we are working this week, particularly with Jamaica, Bahamas, and some people also from Turks and Caicos, to look at how we can support each other in terms of a crisis. And I would encourage all of you, when you're looking at your risk registers, please do think about these kind of crisis events. I know that a great many people in this room were probably here during Ivan. You probably know a lot more about how to handle a hurricane than I certainly do. But it's interesting that one of the tests, one of the exercises the guys are doing this week is not about a hurricane, it's about an earthquake. And I do know quite a bit about that, having spent about 10 years of my life in Japan. And it's interesting that when we used to practice for an earthquake in Japan, we spent some of our time diving under tables, but we spent most of our time crawling through smoke-filled containers, because actually the big threat in an earthquake is fire. So, you know, let's all just think about all of these kind of threats and figure out how we can best manage them. I also wanted to share with you, though, some sort of bigger picture thinking that's been going on in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. Every year they do a report on, you know, how is the current year looking, what are the sort of things we should be aware of. And if you look at the sort of things they're talking about for the coming year, none of it is surprising. None of it is remotely surprising. But I think as you as leaders look forward and try and get that big picture for your businesses, it's worth just bearing it in mind. I mean, one of the things they're saying is that a fragmented world, a multipolar world, is absolutely the new normal. You know, this is not an aberration. This raises really significant questions for G7 countries. You know, what is the role of the G7 in the world? What kind of diplomacy, what kind of new links do G7 countries, and I know Cayman is not in the G7, but it's very, very closely connected to the whole of the G7, I think, aren't we? What kind of new relationships do we need? What does it mean for the sort of relationships we have with what we would call middle powers? You know, there's a lot of countries out there that are growing in strength, economic strength, and how do we develop those relationships? So, you know, it all looks a bit ambiguous, a bit uncertain, and that's not going to change. The US is absolutely crucial to all of this. President Trump being inaugurated on Monday, I think, isn't it Monday? So, you know, the US and the new Trump administration will obviously affect everything. Global growth, what's going to happen to global growth? Well, I think the prognosis, and Marla probably knows a lot more about this and we'll probably talk about it, but sort of slow and fragmented trade and investment. Be prepared for it not to be plain sailing. And looking to the future, I think the overall view is that threats will get worse, but opportunities will also increase. So that kind of just, I think, emphasizes how bobbly it is all looking out there. And so we need to be prepared for those threats, but we also really, really need to think about how are we going to tackle those opportunities, including and perhaps especially in areas like AI. And those of you in the financial industry here will know that, you know, AI is such a powerful change agent, isn't it? So how do we really get to grips with that? Not just in financial services, services, but legal services, anything to do with services, and, you know, probably in all of your businesses, I know you're looking at this. And I've always been very aware in my career, actually, that if you're looking at a big diplomatic picture of the world, business and the economy is absolutely crucial to it. That's true in the US, it's true in the UK, it's absolutely no different in Cayman. When we are building our links, we in government rely on all of you to help us to do that effectively. There is no challenge, there is no issue that government can handle on its own. I'm very, very aware of that. So I really want us to be able to say that we are working together. And building those trade links is really important. And when you're building those trade links, also be aware that I think in the global economic picture, whatever happens, sanctions are probably going to remain as an economic tool, not just in the financial area, but the trade area. So we all need to think about that. But also, let's not forget that trade as that powerful diplomatic tool, that powerful international tool to bring countries together and to create new links is always there for us. And it's something that we in Cayman should continue to develop. So I think, for example, the fact that we've now opened an office in Singapore is really, really a good thing and very, very important for Cayman for the future. And the only other thing I'd say about security is that obviously here close to home, I feel very privileged to be working with extremely effective leaders in areas like the police, the Coast Guard, the prison, but also on the softer side with the Department of Community Rehabilitation. And one of the things we really want to do is to make sure that when we're trying to improve the domestic security of our islands, that we're also looking at the soft side as well as the hard side. And these are areas where I think business can really play an important role, not only in providing opportunities maybe for those people who've sort of come off the tracks of their lives at various times, but also just in creating jobs, because, you know, the cost of living is an issue. Amari was talking about quality of life and the role that you play in making sure that people in our community have access to jobs, to money, to security is really, really important. So please don't forget that, because, you know, you are part of creating that secure environment for everyone to thrive. So that was my kind of first resolution, was try and keep our security looking good. My second resolution actually was about communicating better, because when I look around what people are talking about in the world, when you look at how the world is going, how society is going, it does feel very often, doesn't it, quite polarized, quite quick to jump to judgment without necessarily having read all of the small print, quite focused on very short sentences on TikTok or Twitter or whatever. And so I think we are in many ways, not just in Cayman, but everywhere, kind of lacking this ability to communicate better to each other. And I do believe that the business community, you guys have a really important role to play in this, but obviously it's very important in government as well. One of the things we're trying to do is to ensure that when we're making decisions, and Deputy Premier will probably, you know, be able to reinforce this message, is that, you know, we explain the data and analysis that we've done in order to come to the decision, and that we try to talk to everybody about that, and also try to involve more people in our community in the decisions that we are taking. So that's something that DG and the whole civil service are trying to do better. So in terms of communication, I mean, just a few examples. We've talked quite a lot about financial services. Cayman's brilliant financial services industry. Beneficial ownership is a big thing on the agenda at the moment, isn't it? I do feel we need a better narrative very often, and I think that's partly my role as well, a better narrative to explain just how Cayman's financial services industry is well regulated and the sort of money that is flowing through here and how we're managing that. So I'm talking to Cayman Finance about that. I think we can do a better narrative on how we are looking at sustainable development for the islands. What is the balance between environment and development? Because there is a balance, and we can find the balance. We are working hard to get the right balance, and we just need better communication, I think, on all sides to talk about that. There's also immigration, and that kind of balance between immigration on the one hand and investment on the other hand. So how can we talk about that? How can we talk about jobs for Caymanians in the context of the value also of bringing in expertise? You know, investment, bringing in expertise is a good thing. It can help to grow the local economy. So how do we communicate that? How do we get that balance right? And also, I think for the government, and we are working on this, making sure that we are communicating those kind of long-term plans, whether it's a long-term plan for the holistic development of the islands, whether it's a long-term plan for transport, which has already been mentioned this morning, which is another thing we're working really hard on. But just trying to make sure that we are communicating to everyone what is the long-term vision, because I think very often, you know, that's what people are looking for, isn't it? And in all of this, and I know Joe did want me to talk about accountability, I think. In fact, I had a horrible feeling last night when I saw my little vignette that I was supposed to be talking just about accountability this morning, so I think I've rather failed in that. But in terms of accountability, which I know will be a big theme of today, we are very aware of that. And I think for me, it is a lot about communication, isn't it? Saying what you're going to do, communicate and get lots of people involved in trying to make those decisions, being clear, doing things on time. If you're not being on time, explain why you can't do it on time and what are the reasons for that. Having a long-term plan and having a very clear process, you know, a clear governance process. And all of those things are very close to the heart of our Deputy Governor and the whole civil service and our politicians. And so, you know, I think accountability is absolutely vital and, you know, something that we need to continue to work on. And then finally, my final resolution was really about you guys. It's about, in all of this, what is your involvement? You know, if I'm standing here, what am I asking you to do? So I think one thing is, please do, you know, continue to communicate and talk to us and suggest ways in which you can get involved. Please do think when you're planning your strategies how it can contribute to this bigger picture. Please think individually about what you might be able to offer with your fantastic expertise. I mean, in terms of governance, we've got quite a lot of commissions on the islands, and I know Woody is coming to talk at your next session, I think, and he's just joined our Standards in Public Life Commission. We've got a commission on the Constitution, we've got a commission on human rights. You know, there's all sorts of really important commissions that help us and support government. And sometimes it's quite difficult to find the right people or to get people to volunteer to get in the expertise in these commissions. So if you're interested in that, please do come and talk to me, because I'm really keen to sort of broaden the membership and get more people involved in that. So that's definitely, absolutely an open door. And finally, the UK is also, as Cayman is an overseas territory, the UK is another entity that needs to continue to be involved and will continue to be involved. Our Premier and a couple of our cabinet ministers were in November in London to meet Prime Minister Keir Starmer, Foreign Secretary David Lammy, our Overseas Territories Minister Stephen Doughty, and they were all talking about the future of this great relationship. So the British government will be looking at producing a kind of white paper, which is sort of strategy for how it sees the modern overseas territory relationship developing. And we will also, in the next couple of years, be entering into a bilateral agreement or compact about how we manage very specifically the relationship between Cayman and the UK. So I'd encourage all of you to kind of watch that process and think about if you've got ideas about it. And overall, just, coming back to what I said at the start, I do think having this relationship can bring real benefits to both sides in a very uncertain world. It is not a bad thing very often to have a link to the UK and by extension its allies, which are very clearly standing up for things like democracy and freedom, free trade, not protectionism, and good global governance. So, those are the sort of areas where I think we need to benefit from that relationship, as well as swooping in any kind of crisis if that was necessary as well, which we shouldn't forget. So those are my resolutions for us all. And I would say, looking forward, I feel confident for 2025, largely because of all the work that you guys are doing. And I feel grateful. I think we should all feel grateful that we are in a relatively strong position to tackle all these issues. And I hope that many of you will feel that my door, the door of Governor's office, is always open. So even though I might be rather exhausting having walking up the stairs, you can come and talk to me at any time about any of this. So thank you very much for having me today, and I wish you all a very successful conference. Thank you.